Lord of Mysteries. Fire of Destruction Chapter 407 to 410. With the sound of music filling the room and the men and women dancing, Audrey Hall sank into her role as a spectator who was not a spectator. Chatting and greeting the guests, having a little of the food and drink offered by the servants. The youngest of the Hall family sat down at one of the many tables and calmly enjoyed her vanilla cake. Being under 18 and having not made her debut in society, she could not go out dancing, she could only observe everything calmly. On the dance floor, she watched as her older brother, Hilbert Hall, danced with an elegant smile with a noblewoman. But despite clearly enjoying the dance, the man's green eyes always returned to her occasionally. I know I couldn't come alone, and you had to look after me, but aren't you being a bit overprotective? Restraining the impulse to bite her cheek, the youngest of the Halls couldn't help but complain a little. Sitting quietly beside her, Susie watched the party with her brown eyes, her tail wagging in boredom behind her. 15 guards and all armed. Bakerland is never with less than 3 guards behind him. Looking around with a smile, Audrey took the opportunity to take a closer look at the security of the place. As Chariot said, the party venue was undoubtedly the most secure in the whole house. Although she had seen the odd pair of guards come and go in the corridors, their number was small compared to those in the hall. Bakerland had spent most of the time on the dance floor since the party started. Despite being in his 50s, his brown hair and blue eyes were still alive. His good looks made dancing with the ladies easy. What a disgusting man. With crystal clear green eyes, Audrey did not show her emotions and just continued to observe. Having seen enough, the most beautiful young woman at the party got up from her seat after finishing her cake. Leaning back slightly, she gently patted Susie on the head. I'll be back in a moment, wait here. With an elegant step, the blonde girl walked a little to the left toward one of the best candidates she could see. She did not enter the dance floor directly but somewhat skirted it. This quickly disappointed many, who turned their attention back to their dance partners and gossip. Audrey noticed this with an internal smile. She was close enough even if she didn't enter the dance floor. The brightest gem on the dance floor attracted the attention of several gentlemen who just watched her go by. Although the young woman had not yet had her coming-of-age ceremony, some men did not care about that. She had only been on the dance floor for a few seconds when someone had approached her. Good morning, beautiful lady. I'm very sorry to bother you, but would you do me the honor of accompanying me to this beautiful piece of music? He was a young gentleman. 1 or 2 years older than her and good-looking. Audrey could tell from his clothes that he was from Intis. Audrey followed the courtesies and elegantly declined the invitation. Not only was it not appropriate, but it would also be frowned upon. But being rejected did not stop the man in front of her. He took a bold step toward her and tried to take her hand in his. Is there a problem? Ambassador Bakerland interrupted between the two young people, his hand gripping the man's hand tightly and giving him a strong look. Arg. Complaining in pain, the man apologized as best he could and quickly fled with his tail between his legs. He didn't even have enough time to do anything to get attention, but it didn't take you 3 seconds to show up and play the hero. No doubt he had been watching her for a long time if he could react so quickly. The fact caused a shiver to run down her spine. Ignoring that, she just got more into her role. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Audrey feigned a little fear and gave an elegant but somewhat quick curtsy with her dress. Bakerland smiled warmly and laughed softly. It's unnecessary, Miss Hall. In fact, you would have to forgive me. It's my party, and yet I almost caused a scene. I hope you can forgive me and allow me to invite you to a special plate of Intis. So bold already. You didn't even ask how I was, and you already want to take the reins. Holding back the aftertaste in her stomach, the young Hall was about to say something when her brother finally reached her side. Grabbing his sister's hand and pulling her towards him, the eldest Hall smiled gallantly at Bakerland, but there was a certain edge. Please excuse my little sister, Mr. Ambassador. I will take her and reprimand her for this. Again, I apologize. Quickly dragging his sister along, Hilbert led her away from the dance floor. Bakerland watched his prey escape with a slight twitch of his lips. Once back at his table, the blonde man approached her and whispered in a heavy voice. What were you thinking when you walked across the dance floor? Did you forget that this party has a lot of Intesians? If you wanted to talk to me, you only had to raise your hand, and I would have come running. Don't do that again. Blushing slightly, the noblewoman only nodded tensely and looked to one side. She now shone with innocence, a child who had made a mistake and been severely punished. Such a sight made Hilbert scowl a little, and he could only growl as he covered his face. Just stay here, okay? Yes, brother. Audrey said with eyes narrowed in sadness. With this, Mr. Chariot's man should be able to move much better. Contrary to her outward appearance, Audrey was utterly calm and even proud. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see how Bakerland was all over the music and the drinks while chasing the ladies more intensely. Being a man who liked risk and women, Audrey knew that losing her had been a blow to his pride, which he was now trying to make up for a little. Audrey's attention momentarily shifted to the possible Beyonders guards, and she watched happily as they slipped a little deeper into the party. Her goal of spectating as one of the actors had been accomplished. Inside, the woman felt something melt to a large extent. Containing her amazement, Audrey laughed with joy inside. So this is another way of acting as a spectator. While a spectator should not be the center of attention. If they are capable of causing a reaction or an expected development, they should not be afraid to get into the act, but they should not be a main character, just a supporting one. The young woman immediately thought of a perfect comparison. It was like when a magician in a circus would grab a member of the audience and ask them to draw a card. Although the audience member became an actor, they were not memorable. They were just another part of the act that, once it fulfilled its function and the act ended, would be forgotten. Chariot's man was the main character. She was the audience member, and Bakerland's frustration was the card. Closing her eyes completely, Audrey could barely contain the cry of excitement. This was what it meant to be a true Beyonder. Meanwhile, deep in the ambassador's house, a pair of guards walked through the carpeted corridors, their footsteps making little noise and their sharp eyes observing everything around them. The tables, paintings, and flowers were still in the same places. And it didn't look like anyone other than them had been here. Being hunters, the slightest change in such a familiar environment would be detected immediately, so finding nothing strange, they continued their patrol in another direction. From the shadows of a planter and table, Hazel emerged like a specter from the darkness. Her movements were inseparable from the shadows that embraced her. Wrapping herself up, the young swindler moved with the darkness. She passed several rooms but did not enter any of them, her sense of marauder not sensing that there was anything of value there. Every marauder had a sixth sense for finding things of value. It was not a compass but only an intuition heightened in the sense of taking the best. Having passed on to swindler, Hazel knew this instinct well and let it guide her through the house. Avoiding the guards by hiding in the darkness and advancing cautiously, she came to a room that looked identical to the rest. It's here. Nodding gently, the woman did not attempt to force the door or grab the handle, knowing that the possibility of a trap was almost certain. Most of the guards here were hunters, even Bakerland himself was a conspirator. That there wasn't a trap was impossible. So, using the burnt band, Hazel passed through the shadows and reappeared inside. This must be his room. The swindler looked around with a critical eye. Worthy of an ambassador's quarters, the room was well furnished. The walls were covered with a border of wallpaper. A fairly large bed rested in the middle of the room, a large bookcase full of books on one side, a few landscape paintings, and a table with chairs for sandwiches. Hazel had chosen a corner shadow so she could observe everything. Appearing in the middle of the room would have been asking to set a trap, so she chose the least likely place to be caught. From her vantage point, she scanned every corner she could see. After a few moments of searching, her gaze inevitably returned to a point on the wall. There you are. Again, she made no move but instead leapt from shadow to shadow until she was there. If it weren't for the Scarlet Monarch's blessing, I wouldn't be able to use the burnt band so often. Noticing the lack of spirituality consuming the leap now, she could only nod gratefully. Looking at the unremarkable wall in front of her, her eyes studied it carefully, taking in every detail as best she could. After a few minutes, Hazel noticed that at one point, there seemed to be a cut, and the background paper was not the same as the top one. Bingo! Raising her hand, the woman prepared to open the box. Activating the secret mechanism to reveal the safe was undoubtedly something extremely easy. But Hazel wasn't going to do that. The possibility of another trap was high, so she would do something else. Opening her palm and revealing a beautiful metallic pocket watch, she turned the crown to the right twice. The wall was disordered, along with everything inside it. From closed it became open, just as if there had been a trap inside it switched from active to inactive. Click. A faint click sounded inside the wall. And the wall came away a little. When she opened what was left of it, Hazel watched in amazement as an open safe stood in front of her. Inside was a thick envelope, along with several other documents that the woman grabbed after rigorously checking that there was nothing. She didn't even look at the money there. After doing so, she carefully opened the envelope and checked its contents. Multiple letters were inside, and from what little they contained, she had obtained what she was looking for. By the goddess! This guy was busy. Arms trafficking, instigation of the masses, dealings with gangs, and blackmail material. Not only against the gangs themselves but also with some noble families from both parties. This is the definition of a double-edged sword. Not only if someone betrays him, the ambassador would annihilate them with this information, but if he were to lose it, getting arrested would be the least of his worries. What MI9 would do to him would be nightmarish. This was just what she needed. Taking out the letters and evidence, she quickly put them in her waistcoat and replaced the envelope as it was. After doing that, she closed the safe together with the hidden wall. Click. The crown of the pocket watch was pressed, and the disordered effect disappeared. As soon as she did that, Hazel heard someone coming. Without thinking, the woman quickly sank into the shadows, leaving the room. 3 seconds later, the door was unlocked, and a man entered. He began to look around. Although his gaze was dull and disinterested, the room did not look normal to him. Using his power to see spirit-body threats as a marionettist, he scanned the room for any abnormality. However, seeing and finding nothing, he simply took a coin from his vest and threw it into the air. Catching it in his palm and seeing that the face was down, a negative result, the man just shook his head and left the room. In the next room, hidden in the shadows of a corner, Hazel held her hands over her mouth, holding her breath, her heart beating hard. That was close. Everything all right, Miss Hazel? Do you require assistance? Having forgotten for a moment that her thoughts were being shared, the sudden voice startled her, but Hazel managed to control herself apart from a momentary shock. Somewhat embarrassed, she quickly replied, "All good. Just a little scare. I have the information teacher wanted. Let phase 2 of the plan begin." Copy that. With that, the shadows enveloped Hazel, and she disappeared towards the outskirts of the house. Meanwhile, in the ballroom, Susie suddenly stretched and walked towards a man. He was a man between 30 and 35 years old with a thin mustache and elegant posture. He was Duke, one of the MI9 members who came to watch the ambassador. Oh. Recognizing the mascot of the most precious gem of Backland, Duke couldn't help but smile a little. But that smile tightened when he saw the empty, almost human gaze the animal was giving him. Hypnosis. Immediately recognizing the effects caused by a Beyonder ability, the man tensed. Susie came a little closer and rubbed her muzzle against his leg. "Oh, please excuse me, sir." Raising his head and seeing the youngest of the halls approaching, the man straightened up a little. "She does that when she wants to go to the bathroom. I can't take her outside, my brother won't let me leave the party. If it's not too much trouble, could you go with her and ensure she returns safe and sound? I'd really appreciate it." Looking into the young woman's innocent eyes, Duke looked away and back at the animal's eyes. Susie looked at him for a few seconds before blinking very slowly, almost like an invitation. Whoever hypnotized her wants to talk. But why? What are they trying to gain? And why a dog? Being someone with a decent amount of experience, the older man made a discreet signal with his hand, indicating to the rest of the team to remain alert. If a hypnotist was willing to make contact, there must be a good reason, and in Backland, in an area controlled by MI9, Duke was confident that the danger was within a range he was willing to tolerate. Smiling at the young woman in front of him, Duke bowed elegantly. "It won't be any trouble." He accompanied the golden retriever to the edge of the property and into the forest. Duke remained alert. At any moment he might come across the hypnotist, so he had to be ready to defend himself. When the dog suddenly stopped in front of a tree, the man looked around in search of the person who had called him. After a few minutes of silence, nothing happened. Frowning, he returned his attention to the dog and observed how it had sat down and was staring at him fixedly. Raising a paw and pointing to the tree, towards the large hole in its center, the dog barked 3 times before the brightness returned to its eyes and the intelligence vanished. The next second, Susie began to chase her tail between happy barks. Woof! Woof! Are the effects of hypnosis over? Looking at the tree that had been pointed out a moment ago, Duke approached with suspicion. He kept his distance and leaned in a little more to see what was inside. His distrust diminished and was replaced by confusion. Inside the hole in the tree, there were multiple letters. After a little hesitation, he took the one closest to the edge, opened it, and read it. This is. In disbelief, Duke grabbed another letter, and, checking the contents, he couldn't help but look around in a daze. Who had left this? Although the person who did this might have been nearby, he only thought about it for 3 seconds before deciding against chasing the culprit. The priority was the evidence they needed to capture Bakerland. Once the evidence was secure and the man was arrested, Duke would allow himself to think about the mysterious assistant. Fush! Fush! A golden retriever emerged from some shaky bushes, barking happily. It quickly pounced on the other dog and started to play. Duke looked at the 2 dogs with his mouth hanging open, his eyes trying and failing to find differences. It was as if they were clones. Suddenly, one of the dogs got up victorious and looked at Duke with intelligent, almost fiery eyes. No one is going to believe you, Susie, said in a deep voice and ran into the forest. What the fuck? Duke took a step back in shock, but before he could do anything, Susie turned into golden dust and ascended to the top of the tree where the letters were. Following the dust, the man saw a dark figure among the leaves. This figure waved and disappeared into the shadows. Quote. Opening and closing his mouth in shock, Duke looked at the remaining golden retriever. Woof! Woof! Susie, or who this time seemed to be the real Susie, barked happily, her tail wagging from side to side. Knowing that this had to be reported as soon as possible, Duke recovered through cogitation. With his condition improving, the man took a moment to explore the outskirts of the forest. However, he found nothing. Knowing he was wasting his time, he returned to the tree where the figure had disappeared. Quickly grabbing the letters and putting them in his waistcoat, the man checked his watch and returned to the party. Leaving the party now would only arouse suspicion, so he decided to stay a little longer, but he was definitely planning to leave early. Doing things contrary to expectations is a kind of deception. Laughing softly from the top of the tree, the young swindler could only smile as she felt her potion melting at a good pace. With her mission accomplished, Hazel closed her eyes and sank into the shadows, this time to leave the place. Anxious, excited, and not very patient. He wants to leave and complete something urgently but decides to keep up appearances to not ruin the opportunity given. Audrey watched the man with crystal clear eyes. Knowing what that meant, a graceful smile formed on her face. With an elegant movement, a glass of water rose to her lips. Second mission of the Tarot Club, completed. What's going on with this app? It keeps kicking me out when I'm editing, and the chapters aren't being saved correctly. Thankfully, I save drafts, otherwise, I would have lost my head by now. These are half the chapters of these days, I will be posting the rest later, when the app returns to normal along with some details of the give out of the box. See ya later. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Stepping out of the shadows in the hiding place she had used these last few days, Hazel quickly removed the burnt band from her forearm. The ravings, already at the edge of what she could tolerate, finally fell silent, and she could finally breathe a quiet sigh. Placing a hand on her chest and feeling how fast her heart was beating, the young noblewoman couldn't help but let out a loud giggle. That was amazing. While acting as a marauder had had its thrill, breaking into other nobles' houses or sneaking into rooms during parties, this was the first time she felt like a true Beander. Knowing that while the possibility of death was considerable, her preparations assured her that even if she was discovered, her escape was certain. I want to see what else I can get away with. Having the most valuable secrets and information of my enemies obtained in front of them, ripped from where they thought it was safest. Taking that for myself, Not just because it benefits me but because I can. This feeling of adrenaline is addictive. Shaking a little, Hazel laughed a little more before letting out a soft sigh, then closing her eyes and going into thought. Now calmer and with a small smile, the young woman laughed softly. While it's addictive, it mustn't get to my head. Nothing is more important than my life. If I risked losing my most precious object just for a little excitement, can I really call myself intelligent? This mission task, which her teacher had entrusted to her, taught her many things. It not only helped her digest her potion but also demonstrated the importance and vitality of being careful and the power of information. The whole thing would have failed if just one of the elements used had been missing. Without the blessing of the Scarlet Monarch, she would not have been able to use the burnt band so freely, nor would she have been undetected by the guard hunters. Without the artifacts, she could never have gotten close to the room or opened the safe. In the Beyonder world, your power is not as important as the preparations you have made and the information you possess. Even a normal person could kill a Sequence 6 Beyonder if their preparations were sufficient. Or successfully hunting down a pirate admiral in the middle of Backland's most heavily guarded district. Feeling that she now had a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a Beyonder, Hazel smiled smugly to herself. Undoubtedly, it had been the right decision to enter this world. This is fun. With all that said and done, the woman raised her left arm and slightly pulled back her sleeve. There, just below her wrist, was a simple yellow tattoo of a dog. If mother or father saw this, they would surely faint. Shaking her head, the woman went to where she had hidden the briefcase she had brought and took out various materials. Red poppies, gunpowder, wine, red candles. Hazel quickly prepared an altar and lit the candles with her spirituality. She knelt before the altar, closed her eyes, and joined her hands in prayer. Then, she said in ancient Hermes, "The Scarlet Monarch who burns depravity." The teacher's mission was successfully completed. The information was delivered to MI9 as requested. Smiling under his hood at his student, Adrian gave a subtle nod. Good job. With congratulations given, the flame door was closed, and the returned artifacts were set aside to return with him. Undoing his disguise, the redhead looked down at his left wrist, where a simple tattoo of a soldier was. Having his oldest soldier back brought great peace to the redhead, who, after a few seconds, smiled softly and nodded in respect of the tattoo. Welcome back, Ignir. After looking at the tattoo a little more and feeling a little emotional, Adrian lowered his arm and looked around. At the city in the distance, at the multiple floating flames, at the areas where he kept his things along with the soldiers who moved back and forth, taking care of everything. One of the separate flames was pulsing. It was Charlotte's. Sigh. Sighing a little, the redhead reached out to the side, and the hanged man's blasphemy card flew to him. He absorbed it within himself without saying much and with a flat expression. His clothes disappeared, his modesty was covered by the skirt, and the chains manifested themselves around him. Looking at the result on his work table, the 17-year-old smiled with emotion and quickly saluted. Praise the monarch. With his praise given, the Malay scholar grabbed his most recent creation and looked at it with shining eyes. The charm in his hands was rectangular, a little thinner than usual, and its edges were extremely sharp. It was an intense wine-red color, bordering on blood. The surface was covered with symbols, magic labels, sinister patterns, and twisted path numbers. The symbols merged to form a shadow over the surface. If I had better ingredients, I could make it stronger, but this is already a great advance. Charlotte thought proudly of his creation. It took a few attempts to find the right formula, but he finally succeeded. A medium-grade charm. After spending a moment of pride looking at the gloomy charm in his hands, Charlotte carefully placed it next to the altar he had used to create it. Then he grabbed an open notebook from his work table and wrote down the formula, the process of creating the charm, and its abilities. Mercury, silver, iron, 15 milliliters of human blood, more experiments with different types to be carried out. It can give consciousness to the shadow of the target and turn it against their owner. A normal person could not escape without outside help, and even a Beyonder would find it difficult to free themselves. If the shadows manage to cover their ears, a horrible roar will lash out, infecting them with madness and corruption. Its activation incantation is, Kanten. How quickly the second effect happens you need to experiment. Estimated time, between 5 and 10 seconds. It will last for 6 months, after which the power of the charm will rapidly weaken until it loses its qualities by the end of month 7. As a mystery prior, Charlotte had gained skills related to rituals, divination, and other mystical knowledge, but these were only rudimentary. Every time he made a charm, he would get an idea of its power, what it was capable of doing and how long it would last. But, although he knew how long the charm would last and how useful it would be, that didn't help when it came to creating it. Most of his knowledge about making charms came from his own experimentation and the diary and notebook his uncle left him. The increase brought by the Malay scholar was not as significant in the mystical sense as it was in the physical. It only gave him a little more knowledge of rituals and summoning spirits from the spirit world. The book his boss brought him let his charm making reach the next level. If only I could get high-level ingredients, I'm sure a high-level charm would be possible. Knowing that this would be difficult for now, the young man with the purple eyes could only close his notebook and, after checking that he had not forgotten anything, copy everything down on a separate note. Then he set the charm aside, placed it in a container along with the note, and put it in a basket. Multiple charms of different colors and shapes, some gold, some silver, and some red, were in the basket. Since a god had helped him by giving him some power to make the charms and perform the rituals, he had never again experienced spirituality exhaustion. I could create charms until I used up all the ingredients I have here, but I must not take for granted the kindness of the Scarlet Monarch. That would be asking for divine punishment. The young man sighed with his expression breaking into a small, uncomfortable grimace. He closed the basket and pushed it to one side. He still needed 9 more medium-grade charms to pay Miss Sharon for the book. That done, he looked around his study and couldn't help feeling melancholy. Several shelves were full of mystical materials and ingredients that he could use for whatever rituals he might need. Several books on mysticism about rituals and the making of materials together with his own studies of Hermes and ancient Hermes. The materials and books on that shelf alone must be worth over £2,600, or 7,800 sasam. Compared to how he had been living in East Borough, scratching for every penny he could use for his rituals and charms. He knew he was in heaven now. He picked up a blackish, burnt book and placed it on the shelf, next to his book of rituals. Nodding, Charlotte reviewed his notes one last time before leaving his study, where the team met, at Warehouse 7 on Artirose Street in the Artelia district. Where he lived was a departmental complex, and he did not dare to pray or make altars there. On the advice of his boss, he decided to use one of the unused rooms in the warehouse and turned it into his studio. The young man left his studio and returned home with all that done. It was quite late but the sun had not yet set so he wanted to return before it got completely dark. In another part of the city. Looking at the altar before her, Serena Williams took a slow breath and repeated for the 16th time in the last 15 minutes. Red candles, red poppies. The flowers must be at the top, forming the tip of a spear, and the offering must be placed at the tip of it. Rechecking the altar and seeing that everything was fine, the woman nodded slightly and closed the cabinet where it was hidden. Getting up with a slight groan from having been bent over for so long, Serena couldn't help but look at the mirror in her room with a somewhat astonished look. The person looking back at her was almost a stranger. Her cheeks were no longer so thin that she could see the flesh and bone underneath, a healthy layer of fat inflating them. Her eyes were no longer so deep and now seemed to have a spark of life. The same was true of her skin, which, despite the scars, had a healthier pink color. Her black hair had also become shinier and was tied back with a simple copper laurel. Although she could still feel a little pain, it wasn't very important. She hardly even noticed it. What a miraculous power. To be able to heal with just food. Patting her cheek, Serena looked at her reflection a little more before sighing with joy. A big smile formed on her face, and she couldn't help but hum happily. Soon, I should be able to take the potion, and I will be a Beander. I will still be able to follow Mr. Kenway. Gently shaking her head, Serena sighed slowly. Leaving her room, she went straight to her kitchen, where the rich smell of freshly made food filled her head and lit up her spirit. Unconsciously, Serena smiled, and her pace quickened a little. Sorry I'm late. Apologizing a little, she sat in front of the black-haired boy. Don't worry, Miss Serena. The food will be ready soon. Opera looked over her shoulder at the duo at the table and laughed a little. Thank you very much again. Opera smiled gratefully before turning her attention to the boy. Are you feeling all right, Ademisal? You haven't said anything since you two arrived. Usually, the boy would be muttering or saying something nonsensical by now. But he was unusually quiet, just absently playing with a fork. When called, the young man looked up from his fork, and his gaze focused on her. Serena was taken a little by surprise at how conscious his gaze was. Ah, yes, I'm fine. I'm fine. Forgive me. I'm still not used to the silence in my mind. Adamisual whispered at first before raising his voice a little. It's still a bit strange, but I can see that it's nowhere near what he used to do. Her gaze moved from the boy to Opera in a silent question. Understanding what was being said, the crimson-eyed woman gave a subtle nod. The boss finally gave him the monster potion, making Adamisual recover his sanity. That's why he's so silent. He's still not used to being normal. He's already a Beander. Mumbling dazedly, Serena looked at the boy in front of her, who could barely be half her age. As she said this, a quick thought crossed her mind, and she could only hold her legs tightly under the table. That means I'm the only normal person now. I'm falling behind. I'm falling behind. If this kept up, she would be abandoned. Abandoned. No. No. Her gaze and vision swirled and everything around her became blurry. A gentle touch grazed her arm and the woman blinked. Everything stopped spinning and she could only see the boy looking at her with confused eyes. Are you all right, Miss Serena? Blinking again, the older woman smiled and carefully took Ademisal's hand and squeezed it in appreciation. I'm fine, just a little hungry. Good. I guess the meal's over then, Opera joined the conversation, placing plates of beef soup and cheese rice in front of them both. Ademisal looked at her for a few seconds before slowly nodding, the boy lowering his gaze to his plate. Quote. Then he turned to look at Serena's plate. Quote. He repeated this twice, his eyes shining with extreme confusion by the third time. Looking at her plate, which was 3 times bigger than the boy's, Serena couldn't help blushing with embarrassment. I'm on a weight gain diet so I have to eat more. Shouldn't that be the other way around? Eat less to lose weight? Adamisual asked innocently. Quote. My situation is a little different. Before Adamisual could ask another question, Opera's hand delicately but firmly grasped his ear. Weren't you ever taught that it's rude to ask a woman her weight? Opera suppressed softly but firmly. Sorry. Adamisual cried out in pain at such a brutal attack and began to apologize as fast as he could. Serena looked on a little lost, her gaze and surroundings finally coming to rest and a gentle smile spreading across her face. Not wanting the boy to suffer for something so silly, she quickly came to his defense. Please stop, Miss Opera. You'll have the boy's ear off at this rate. I'll stop once I'm sure he won't say another stupid thing. Contrary to usual, the sky was a bit clear on Sunday morning. The sun bathed Ashera in a beautiful golden light. In Astope Quarter, in apartment 145, Flora was enjoying a beautiful dream when, like a horrible murderer in the darkness, a ray of light entered the cracks in her curtain and shined directly on her face. Grrrg. Growling in the face of the attack, Flora opened her eyes and looked at her curtain with pure hatred. Useless curtain. You're not worth half of what you cost. Covering herself with the thick purple blankets, the woman tried to fall asleep, but a rumbling in her stomach stopped her. Quote. A hand emerged from the mountain of blankets and grabbed a lady's pocket watch from the bedside table next to the bed. With a click, it opened, and Flora could only curse. It's 6 in the morning. Jacob knew she could ignore the hunger a little longer and get another 2 hours of sleep before getting up and doing her activities. But why would she do that? She now had someone who could cook and make her a quick but delicious breakfast in less than 20 minutes. Although such an idea would usually be dismissed after a while, Flora had been feeling like getting a little vengeance lately. With a plan already in mind, the woman got out of bed and out of its warm embrace. Immediately, she could feel the cold biting and tearing at her skin. How cold! Trembling a little at the temperature change, Flora couldn't help but grit her teeth. Although the Great Lumia forest ensured that summers were cool and not too brutal, autumn and winter were particularly freezing compared to the rest of its neighbors. The desire to return to her bed became almost irresistible, but Flora remained strong, having already gone too far. And Jacob did not back down from her decisions. Tightening the white robes she wore to sleep a little tighter against her body, she grabbed one of her thick coats and left her room in the direction of his. Raising a hand, she quickly knocked on the door. Princess, I'm hungry. Get up and cook something. Flora lowered her hand and waited a few more seconds. There was no response from the other side. This guy, an eyebrow twitched on her face. With his senses as sharp as they were, there was no way he hadn't heard her, so the bastard was deliberately ignoring her. Knock, knock, knock. Princess. Flora paused again and waited a few more seconds without receiving a reply. Then, she took slow breaths to calm herself. It was already too far, and there was no way she was going back to her bed on an empty stomach and upset. Grabbing the doorknob, she shouted, I'm coming in. Without waiting for an answer and doubting she would receive one, Flora opened the door. This guy had never locked his bedroom door, so she wasn't surprised it was so easy. Looking at the bed where a redhead could be seen, Flora snorted and was about to take a step when she froze, her eyes widening. Not even when they were in the safety of their apartment did the man change his appearance. So why was he now using his real appearance? A trap. Immediately realizing her mistake, Flora tried to flee the room, but before she could take a step, her body tensed and stopped. All around her, invisible threads wrapped around her figure and held her in place. Before she could try to escape the trap, she was pulled forcefully forward. Towards some open arms that quickly wrapped around her like a boa constrictor when she was barely in range. Well, what did the wind bring me? A male voice, clearly just roused from sleep, whispered temptingly in her ear. Let me go. With her ears glowing red, Flora looked up and stared intently at the man holding her. Pretending to think about it for 3 seconds, Adrian laughed softly. Nah, I don't think I will. He pointed with his chin to a pillow on the floor several meters from the bed. You knocked over my favorite pillow, so you must take responsibility and take its place. I'll return it to you with flowers and gifts, so let me go, princess. Flora again tried to escape her current situation, but the man ignored her. Using his threads, Adrian covered them both with his brown blanket and settled more comfortably in his bed with Flora in his arms. His head rested comfortably on the pillows while the woman was on top of him. If it bothers you so much, you can leave. I'm not holding you so tight. Having been caught, the woman said nothing for several seconds. She just enjoyed how comfortable she was and the warmth coming from her companion. After 39 seconds, Flora broke the silence, her ears not so red but still clearly embarrassed. Can I ask why this is? Sundays are the only days I can sleep until 9. Adrian said with narrowed eyes, looking down at the woman. What's wrong with me wanting to enjoy it? What about this? Flora asked, making a clear reference to the current situation. With the way you always looked at me, I thought you'd love the idea of finally enjoying your 2 favorite marshmallows. Adrian dragged his tongue as he took the opportunity to press the woman against his chest gently. Ah, they're much softer than I thought. No. For a moment, Flora relaxed and let herself be pampered more. Reacting to what was happening, she quickly tried to free herself. Let me go. I also thought I had to make up for the last few days. All attempts to escape from her wonderful prison stopped, and the Jacob looked at the redhead in confusion. Explain. Well, where do I start? Adrian joked a little before laughing softly. I've noticed how you've been acting. You don't like it at all when someone touches your things, do you? With the receptionist. When opera brought Adamisual. Gosh, even with the detective. You're a jealous worm. Her ears became warm again, and she could only look to one side. It's that obvious. It looks like you want to tear the face off anyone who dares to touch me. Flora said nothing for several seconds. Doesn't it bother you? Why would it? It's just a wife feeling jealous of her husband, it's normal. Somewhat surprised, Flora turned her attention back to the redhead, who smiled gently at her. What? I thought I was already yours. Or am I wrong? I gave you more than half my life. That's practically a marriage proposal in my book. Flora couldn't help it. She just snorted and, already giving into this, buried her face in the chest in front of her. You're an idiot. Her pillows vibrated with the man's giggle. I do my best. Flora replied, losing interest in the conversation and closing her eyes. Is it a good idea to walk around in your true appearance? My lord's soldiers are patrolling outside, and my traps are all active. If anyone comes even close to our room, I will know. Besides, there was no way I could do this with Harvey Wayne's face. Adrian admitted honestly. Why? It wouldn't be as intimate. Besides, my chest is smaller in that identity. Peef. Barely holding back her laughter, Flora just rubbed her face with the blissful pillows and nodded gratefully. Thanks for the thought. I never liked that face. You're welcome. Quote. 5 minutes passed in silence, and again, it was Flora who broke it, with much more tiredness in her voice than before. Will you let me go now? Adrian didn't reply immediately, he just rubbed his cheek against the woman's hair. Smelling the soft scent of lavender and honey, he sighed happily. After doing that, he whispered as he hugged her tighter, do you really have to ask? Ignoring the warmth of her ears, Jacob closed her eyes and buried her face in his chest. Carefully, she inhaled a little, ensuring she wouldn't be discovered. Although, at this point, Flora doubted that the man would mind her smelling him. It smelled sweet and like a campfire. Although it was a curious combination. It didn't bother her at all. I'm expecting chocolate pancakes for breakfast. Flora whispered, closing her eyes, the world of dreams never being as tempting as it was today. At such a request, Adrian nodded, already half asleep. Whatever you say, darling. After laughing a little, the duo settled down better, and after a while, they both fell asleep in each other's arms. Hours later, 10 a.m. Putting some of the chocolate-covered pancakes to her lips, Flora dared not look at anything other than her food. Her ears were so red they seemed to be burning. And that heat only intensified with every breath she took. Xness. No matter how good the food in front of her smelled, the only smell that seemed to enter her nose was that of the redhead in front of her. The redhead who seemed to be beaming from the big smile on his face. Looking at his companion with a big smile, Adrian hummed happily. Don't look at him. Don't look at him. Trying to ignore how fast her heart was beating, Flora took another bite of her pancake and chewed slowly. She had never felt so embarrassed as she did now. Not even when she choked on that apple seed in her youth and became the family's laughing stock came close to this. Unaware of his companion's thoughts, Adrian happily brought some pancakes to his mouth. I never slept as well as I did today. How about you, Flora? Almost choking on her food, the aforementioned woman grabbed her coffee cup and took a deep sip to help wash down the food. Having been saved from death, Flora pressed her lips together as best she could and nodded slightly. It was good. Foo-foo, I'm glad to hear it, Adrian sang happily. From how you held on to me so tightly, I thought you were uncomfortable. I'm glad you enjoyed it as much as I did. The warmth from her ears passed to her cheeks, and the woman bit her lips hard. Thank you. I think. Nodding happily, Adrian closed his eyes, brought his cup of coffee to his lips, and drank. Putting the cup down next to his plate, the redhead began to trace circles on the edges of the cup. He smiled gently, resting his opposite arm on the table and resting his cheek on his palm. Hey Flora. Can you look at me for a moment? I don't think I'll ever be able to look at your face again in my life. Shouting with all her might in her mind, the woman struggled for a few moments before nodding tensely. What do you want, princess? Just when she was about to get annoyed in the middle of her meal, her words died in her mouth. Her partner had a strange smile on his face. Like his scarlet eyes, they looked extremely warm. Flora didn't know how to describe it. She had never seen him smile like that. Such a vision confused her immensely, but simultaneously, she could feel her heart about to explode. She felt. Seeing that smile felt much more intimate than having slept together. Amid these thoughts, Adrian spoke, bringing her back to reality. I really enjoyed our little nap. I know it may sound strange, but. In something she had never seen before, Flora watched open-mouthed as the redhead blushed a little and looked away. Wouldn't you like to make this a regular thing? Feeling her brain shut down, Flora blinked slowly. After a few moments and finally processing what he had said, A blush exploded on her face, and she let out an incredulous scream. Wah what? Feeling his face grow a little warmer, as did his embarrassment, Adrian regretted having said it. Ashamed, he covered his face and his eyes. But, having already gone too far to turn back, he defended himself as best he could. I mean, it doesn't have to be every day. Just on Sundays, we can get a good rest. Quote. Without a reply, he slowly lowered his hand and looked at his partner, almost expecting that as soon as their eyes met, she would scream at him. But what he saw almost took his breath away. Flora had her mouth slightly open. Her gray eyes shone softly against the light of the lamps, giving them a beauty worthy of gems and pearls. Her curly white hair was messy. Moving in all directions and looking much fluffier than usual, he found her extremely beautiful. It looked as if a cloud had settled on her head. For a second, he forgot to breathe. Realizing that no one had said anything, he just coughed falsely and looked at the extremely interesting lamp at his side. Well, what do you think? Flora blinked a little, coming back to herself. After about 10 seconds of frozen silence, she looked away at the extremely interesting kitchen beside her. It won't be a problem. And so, in the uncomfortable silence, the couple finished their very late breakfast. I have to be honest, I was kicking my feet in the air while writing this. I just love writing the interactions between Flora and Adrian. In a short note, I read your comments and realized a problem that I plan to solve. The nicknames that Adrian uses for gods and outer deities are very confusing. I don't know why I never thought they weren't. I will start leaving notes to know who and what they refer to. I am very sorry for the confusion.